good morning, everyone. As you can see, obviously, I have been given the opportunity to speak to the class today. Inexplicably, I don't know how this continues to happen. We have Mark right here, and but yet here we go. So, any visitors here today? Anyone who's a visitor? Okay, well, good. Then most everybody then should be clear on what you're about to get. So that'll be that. I want to start off with a couple of things. For those of you who were here last Sunday, you heard Mark share with us that Mark has a medical condition. What is that called?
Autobrewery syndrome.
Autobrewery syndrome. That's right. And Mark was very transparent about that, and he shared with the group when he was up here last Sunday that just prior to coming in, he blew a .08, I believe was the number. And so I wanted to share with you that since the precedent has been set, I blew a .08 before I came up here today as well. I don't have brewery syndrome. I just shotgunned a couple of beers before I came in, kind of like high school. So anyway, but I like the precedent that was set, and so I think I'm just going to continue that. So we'll just see where this goes. But anyway, before I get into the message, again, once I'm given the opportunity to address the class, I kind of like to do things a little bit differently. I like more of an interactive format. I like to have interaction, feedback, questions, things of that nature. So I wanted to encourage you as we're going through this to feel free to do so. I'm certainly not suggesting I know all the answers. I certainly don't, but there's some good, smart folks in the room who do. And I think that that's just an environment where we can all gain and get something out. No offense to the lecture environment. It's just that when I'm given the opportunity, that's what I choose to do. So I'll look forward to all of your thoughts and opinions. Questions, comments. The old saying, there's no such thing. We've all heard this. There's no such thing as a dumb question. That is not true. And so I would caution you to really think. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, I do want you to participate, and that's that. So if anyone's been paying attention, beginning Friday became very interesting in our country with the announcement of the reversal of Roe v. Wade, and I thought it was interesting for a lot of reasons, some obvious, because this week there was a couple of things that I just wanted to start out by sharing some information with the group and get some feedback if anyone wants to offer any. But one of the things that there were two polls that came out this week that I found very interesting, and it takes a lot at this point in life to surprise me. I'm just that guy. As you get older and you've seen a lot, done a lot in my line of work, nothing surprises me anymore. And but I was a little surprised at what I saw here because I guess either didn't pay close enough attention or didn't think about it enough. But I did want to share a couple of polls with the group that I also think kind of tie into to Friday's events and what we've seen subsequently. So the first poll I want to talk about is the number of Americans who believe in God has dropped to a historic low. This poll, by the way, was done by Gallup, so it's not kind of a halfway poll, if you will, by some third-party organization. Gallup, I think, does a pretty good job because full transparency. I tend to be a little skeptical of polls and things. I think a lot of them are motivated by the source. My wife is laughing at me. By the way, my wife told me when I mentioned some of this stuff, she said, "You going to talk about that?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to." She says, "Well, I will just have to get them walk out." And I'm going to wear some comfortable shoes, because this is going to be a long walk home. I got the keys to the car, so but anyway. But I said, no, I'm not gonna throw gas on the fire. But anyway, but since these two polls actually came from Gallup, I really felt that added some validity to them. So anyhow, I'm not gonna read verbatim, but I'm gonna go through this. The percentage of Americans who say they believe in God has dipped to the lowest number in the past 80 years, according to a new Gallup poll published Friday. The Values and Belief poll conducted from May 2nd to May 22nd showed 81% of people answered that they believe in God. That is down 6 percentage points from the 87% of respondents who said they believed in God in 2017. This year is the lowest percentage in Gallup's trend since the public opinion poll company first asked these questions in 1944. This year's poll found that 17% of Americans said they do not believe in God, And when asked the questions first in 1944, again in 1947, and twice in the 50s and 60s, a consistent 98% of respondents said they believe in God. So if you just think real quickly there, from the 50s and 60s, we've gone from 98% consistently to now we are at 81. When Gallup asked the questions nearly 5 decades later, 2011, it was 92% of Americans said they believed in God. A subsequent survey in 2013 found belief in God dipping below 90% to 87%, where it stood for 3 subsequent updates, et cetera, et cetera. Now, here's where things get a little interesting. The poll found that the belief in God has plummeted in the most recent years among namely three segments. That would be young adults. That doesn't define what a young adult is. In my world, I kind of think 25 and below-ish, maybe. I don't know what their definition is. So young adults, people on the left of the political spectrum, and it specifies namely liberals and Democrats. Gallup said those groups show drops of 10 or more percentage points, comparing the 22 figures to the average of the 2013-17. Most of the subgroups have experienced at least a modest decline, although conservatives and married adults have essentially no change according to the polling company. The poll found the groups with the largest declines are also the groups that currently least likely to believe in God include liberals. 62% say they don't believe in God. Young adults, and this is concerning, all of it is, but this is in particular, young adults, 68% say they don't believe in God. Democrats, 72% say they don't believe in God. Belief in God is highest among the political conservatives at 94% and Republicans 92%, which Gallup said reflects that religiosity, which I did not know that's even a word, but it's here. Religiosity is a major determinant of political divisions in the U.S. So when I said that this kind of surprised me, we all know that not everyone believes in God, right? But I did not really think about or put 2 and 2 together at just how many people don't, and how when you look at the political spectrum, how clear the division is between the two. And again, I don't know how accurate polls are. This comes from a pretty reputable group, but I thought it was very telling, especially when you look at a lot of things going on in the country. The second poll that came out talks about moral values in the country. And the poll states clearly that the 50% of Americans think that we have poor moral values as a country, 50%. So again, the divisions continue to become clear. I'm not going to go through all the detail on it, but I did want to touch on kind of some buckets here. Republicans were most likely to rate the country's values as poor, with 72% of Republicans respondents rating the values as poor, and that number has risen sharply since former President Donald Trump left office. I have no idea what that has to do with anything. Democrats were less likely to give the country poor marks, with 36% rating the country's moral values as poor compared to 48%. Respondents also didn't indicate optimism that the state of the country's values would improve in the future, with 78% saying the decline in values is getting worse. By the way, when asked, only 1% of Americans rated the country as excellent in moral values regardless. So I thought those were pretty interesting little numbers there, and speak volumes to kind of the current environment that we're in. If you're anyone who watches the news or looks around, you can see a lot of things going on. And it just dawned on me in this moment that perhaps a big part of what's going on is just this continuing degradation in the belief in God, and that younger people in particular, that's the one that I find most concerning, that next generation coming up. 68% are saying, I don't believe at all. And so if you have such a low belief percentage, or high belief percentage, of people who do not believe in God, why would we be surprised that our moral values are on the decline.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Have our moral values ever gone up?
You know, it doesn't say. It doesn't say. It's an opinion on, you know, what people think, but I think they've kind of used a high water mark and then measured it from there. So I don't know that there's ever been an increase. I think anecdotally, I would probably say no.
Yeah.
You know, that's just my 2 cents. You know, I make the joke a lot about we've gone from the Andy Griffith generation, look there and see where we are now. And I realize that in these, there's a lot of subjectivity perhaps, and we don't know some of the metrics that are used and the definitions that are used, but I think universally, it probably highlights a big problem in our country, and that is the decline in moral values. There could be a correlation between that and just an ongoing decline in the belief in God. Yes, ma'am.
I would guess there was a shift after 9/11.
That's what I was going to
May
say.
have
I think
been
there was.
moral values. People may have used those terms, but I would guess that would be one of the only times in my lifetime there could have potentially been a shift. People assigned moral values, even though it's probably just more religious. People go into Jesus, whatever. That would be the only time I can think of. So.
That's what I was going to say. I think there was.
It did not. That's what I was saying earlier. You know, there were some things in there that I'd like to know the definition of. Hey, you know, did you ask about specific moral values, or because your moral values and mine could be different than Mark's. So we all benchmark against what we think, right? So, but it was just interesting in my mind the correlation between those two, the timeliness of the polls, that both by Gallup, probably not by accident.
If you combine those two things together, it basically admit the fact that religion is the problem, which is kind of what they're insinuating, then each, I shouldn't say party, but camp, if you will, is calling the other side's moral values the problem. Each one of them has a very diametrically opposed definition of morals.
And that's exactly right. No, that's exactly right. So I thought it was us. Any other comments on that? Again, I don't want to get in trouble with Lynn. I want to make sure I move on quickly. And
well, I will say, you know, like Gallup in particular, the way they ask these questions is intentional. And for the moral values question, that's intentionally ambiguous. Barna, on the other hand, when Barna will do research, he used to, 15 years ago, just call people Christians, like people identify as a Christian. Now he actually gives a definition. He says, here's what are you a cultural Christian, or are you a born again believer? And he gives the criteria. And so when he gives now and says evangelicals, this is what they believe. These are people who profess Christ as the only God, the only way, that God is the creator. We didn't go through a big bang. All of the things that are what's called absolute truth. So he's weeding everything out and removing the ambiguity. But these polls are intentionally designed to do exactly what you said. What is it to you? Because the whole point is it's relative. It's your moral values are relative to your moral values, and we don't see the same. What they're saying is everyone is in agreement there's a decline, but those declines can be assigned to a lot of different things, and usually it's one party or one philosophy bickering at the other. We saw a TikTok video from a girl that used to be in this church. She came up through the youth group. She spent 22 years here, and after Friday, she put a TikTok video up and just went berserk on Christianity and how it had murdered more people over the years than abortion had ever considered. But her whole attack was this. She was basically saying, hey, you Christian conservatives, your values, your morals are so upside down compared to what they should be with the world. And that's the point of this poll.
Good, thank you. Anything else? All right, very good. Well, let's go ahead and get into today's message. And we're going to continue in 1 Kings where Mark left off. So if you will turn with me, we're going to be in 1 Kings chapter 12. We're going to be focused on a small subset of scripture of verses 6 through 19. So as you're turning there, just a little bit of background from last week to set the stage. You may recall that God had appeared to Solomon and promised a great blessing as long as Solomon followed. Yes, ma'am. Oh, I'm sorry, chapter 12. I apologize. 1 Kings 12, verses 6 through 19. Thank you for asking. So Solomon had appeared, God had appeared to Solomon, said, if you follow me, great things will happen. We saw that his kingdom became exceedingly wealthy and prosperous, and then we also saw that ultimately things did not work out for a number of reasons. When you have 700 wives and 300 concubines, I mean, what could possibly go wrong, right? But one of the key characters in this or people was Jeroboam. He had served as Solomon's labor official, and he had been given the message through a prophet that one day he would lead over some of the tribes of Israel. And then when Solomon heard about this, he tried to kill him. And so Jeroboam then fled, and to escape being killed, fled to Egypt. Solomon went on to rule for about 41 years, and then his son Rehoboam assumed the throne, and that's where we're going to pick up today. Were you going to say something? Oh, okay. Picked up today. So anyhow, the essence of our talk is going to center around those scriptures, and really the crux of the message is going to be that failing to listen to wise counsel can have some pretty significant consequences, and really cause some conflict. So at this point, we're going to talk about Rehoboam. He had a significant decision to make that we're going to get into, and he sought counsel from a couple of different sources, and we're going to focus on who he chose to believe and what the end result was. But before I get into that, as you know, when you've heard me speak before, I like to kind of try to create an environment where I get you to think about things in today's time. Because clearly, what's in here, although written a long time ago, it is applicable today. And I know for me, if I can think about things in today's time and apply it to my life, that makes a big difference for me. So I want you to kind of in your mind think about times in your life when you were a child, you were coming along as a young adult. Think about when maybe times in your career. Think about times for those of us who are parents, time as a parent. And you got some advice. You sought advice, or maybe you received advice unsolicited. But at the various points in your life, we've all sought advice and we've all received advice. And I think we can also all look back at those various times and realize that there's advice that we received that we took that advice and we were thankful. The outcome was good. There's times in life where we got advice that we didn't take and we wish we had, right? I think that there's times in life where we sought advice from the wrong sources, and we may have learned something from that. So as we go through this, just think about the times in your life where you have received advice, or maybe even given advice to a child, a coworker, somebody like that, a spouse maybe. As we go through this, please think about those things. So what I want to do is, before we get into verses 6 through 19, I'm going to read to kind of set the stage a little bit more, verses 1 through 5. Rehoboam went to, and I cannot pronounce this, Shechem, is that right? Okay. For all of Israel had come to Shechem to make him king. And as soon as Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, heard of it, for he was still in Egypt and had fled from King Solomon, then Jeroboam returned to Egypt. And they sent and called for him, and Jeroboam and all the assembly of Israel came and said to Rehoboam, "Your father made our yoke heavy. Now therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke on us, and we will serve you." He said, Rehoboam said to them, "Go away for 3 days and then come again to me." So the people went away. So essentially, you have Rehoboam, who is now about to come into power, and they're about to make him king. Jeroboam hears of this. He comes back from Egypt. People then get with him. They go to Rehoboam and say, "Hey, look, Solomon was pretty rough on us. We just want you to know that if you'll lighten the burden, lighten the load, essentially improve our life, we will serve you." And he said, "Check back with me in 3 days. I'm gonna think about this, okay?" And so at this point, we now get into the core of today's lesson, and we're going to learn and see how that went. So beginning in verse 6, then King Rehoboam took counsel with the old men who had stood before Solomon his father while he was yet alive, saying, how do you advise me to answer this people? And they said to him, if you will be a servant to this people today and serve them and speak good words to them when you answer them, then they will be your servants forever. So right out of the gate, we see that Rehoboam consulted with the elders, the people who had served his father, right? They had been through Solomon's time. They had seen the good, they had seen the bad. And so just by, I think, definition, they saw what worked and what didn't. And they saw perhaps what maybe needed to be changed, right? Because they had a front row seat, if you will, to the whole thing. So he goes to them first, and they have experience. They recommend that he does what? That he brings servant leadership. And I couldn't help but think of a conversation you and I had, and I won't rehash it, but we talked about in your professional career that at one point in time somebody mentioned something about servant leadership. That's not going to work. And I realize I'm paraphrasing, but and that's just beyond belief that somebody would say that. But so that's the first thing that they've recommended. Based on their experience, we think that coming to them with servant leadership attitude is what you should do. And so let me ask you a quick question. When it comes to making decisions or seeking advice from somebody, do you think that having experience is important, or maybe not so much? Yeah? So I would agree. I would agree that, certainly experience is valuable. You've learned something firsthand. You can read something in a book, but once you experience it firsthand and do it, it has a completely different meaning, and chances are you're going to be better. If you've gone through something like, for instance, these elders, they had been with Solomon throughout, hypothetically, his 41 years. So they had a lot of experience and knowledge and wisdom that they could have given, or they tried to give Rehoboam. So I agree. But the other factor I would mention on that is just because you have experience may not make you necessarily an expert. We're going to talk about that in a moment as well. So moving forward, verses 8 through 11. But he abandoned, Rehoboam, he abandoned the counsel that the old men gave him and took counsel with the young men who had grown up with him and stood before him. And he said to them, what do you advise that we answer this people who have said to me, lighten the yoke that your father put on us? And the young men who had grown up with him said to him, thus shall you speak to this people who said to your father, said to you, your father made our yoke heavy, but you lighten it for us. Thus shall you say to them, my little finger is thicker than my father's thighs. And now, whereas my father laid on you a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. And by the way, scorpions are not actually a scorpion. It is a whip that has hooks and barbs on it. And so that's the visual. When he said scorpions, they knew exactly what he was talking about. He wasn't talking about the little thing they'll sting you. It was a whip. So that just kind of emphasized, you had the whip before, this is going to be even worse. So again, in your mind, if you'll kind of envision, here is Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, standing there, seeking counsel from essentially his buddies, right? And he goes to his buddies and says, hey, what do you think? And so his friends are there, and they say, well, here's what I think you ought to do. I think you ought to double down on them. And I think you need to send a message by saying that, hey, my pinky is bigger than, your pinky is bigger than your father's thigh. Send a message of, I think I'm greater than him. And you think that things were tough then, the old you ain't seen nothing yet kind of comes into mind. I'm going to increase your labor, your yoke, and if you don't like it, I'm going to discipline you with scorpions, meaning the whip with the barbs. So it was kind of one of these scenarios where I thought about, he's got his buddies around him, and they're giving him advice, which is completely opposite of what the elders said. You've got these guys, who have really probably no experience. Certainly Rehoboam doesn't. He's riding his father's coattails. He's in this only because his father was Solomon. And his buddies are there advising him to do this. And so it begs the question, why do you think that they would say this to him? What might be their end goal?
They're not just buddies, they're yes men.
That's exactly right.
His friends, he came around his friends that did what he wanted them to do, or they would say anything in order to get good graces so they could be part of the king's ego, whatever, get clout, whatever. So.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So the core of this is you have Rehoboam standing there, and he envisions himself as greater than Solomon, more powerful. He wants to expand his kingdom, and he's got a little bit of an ego problem. And his friends who grew up with him, they know him, and they know probably exactly what to say, what he wants to hear, and they say exactly that. They appeal to his ego and be like, hey, Rehoboam, tell him, this pinky is bigger than you. Tell him this, tell him that. And that's exactly what he wanted to hear, what his ego wanted to hear. I would also submit to you that these folks perhaps wanted to better themselves, and I think you alluded to that they're hopeful that as Rehoboam builds his kingdom based on this method, that they too can be along for the ride. And they kind of have the attitude of, what's in it for me? If I gain favor with Rehoboam, if we become kind of one of his advisors, his counsel, what's in it for me? And chances are they probably talked amongst themselves or thought privately, probably a lot of good. So they are appealing to his ego, giving him advice that is counter to what his the elders had given him, and I think with interesting motivation. But let me ask you this. He sought guidance from two people. Who did he not seek guidance from? Exactly right. At no point did he seek guidance, advice by going to the Lord. He went to his friends, and he went to his father's team of advisors, if you will, but he never sought guidance from the Lord. At least the text would suggest that. Okay. Moving on into verses 12 to 15. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam on the third day, as the king said, "Come to me again on the third day." And the king answered the people harshly, and forsaking the counsel that the old men had given him, he spoke to them according to the counsel of the young men. "My father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions." So the king did not listen to the people, for it was a turn of affairs brought about by the Lord, that he might fulfill his word, which the Lord spoke to, and I can't get this name either. Anybody want to take a run at that for me? You got anything? Ahijah? I don't know. We'll go with that. To him by the Sheelite, I think, to Jeroboam the son of Nebat. So what we see here is they came, they met, and in fact, Rehoboam did deliver the message just as his friends had suggested that he do. He did so in a harsh and aggressive manner. So what do you think he hoped to accomplish by speaking to Jeroboam and all of the constituents there? What do you think he hoped to accomplish by coming out and being aggressive and speaking to them harshly? That's right. He wanted to send the message right out of the gate. I'm in control, and this is the way it's going to be. Kind of the old, there's a new sheriff in town. So this is the way it is. This is what you can expect from me. And it then begged the question, that message obviously was not, and you'll see here in a little bit, was not going to be received well, understandably. But in some of the commentary, it talked about not only the message itself, but the way the message was delivered. Because he delivered the message harshly. He delivered the message surrounded by his buddies. We don't know how many people were there. And I think to kind of, again, strengthen his position in the eyes, or so he thought. And it begs the question, in your mind, how does the demeanor of someone delivering a message affect how you're going to receive that? Do you think that has any impact at all? Yeah, a lot of heads go up and down on that one. I think that's exactly right. And, again, when I think about this guy, he's out there, he's got his friends, and he delivers this message in probably this loud and boisterous, manner. And people, were probably thinking, hey, we're going to show up on the third day. He's going to be, gracious. He's going to lift the yoke, lighten our burden, if you will. But in fact, it went exactly the opposite. And based on his tone and his demeanor, Lord only knows what's going to happen, right? So it to me kind of drives home, or was a reminder for me that, when delivering a message to someone, how you say it can oftentimes be more important than what you say. I'm in a line of work where oftentimes we have to deliver bad news to somebody about something. Something doesn't go the way that they want. And you try to say that in a compassionate and kind way, and sometimes it goes pretty well, sometimes it doesn't. But if you deliver a message, especially something that someone doesn't want to hear, think about it. If it's delivered in a nonchalant, calloused, maybe aggressive way, that usually does not go very well. And then I took it one step further, and I got to thinking about the current environment we're in, and kind of thinking about what I've been seeing on television since Friday, and talking about the tone of things, the messaging of things, and how it affects us. When we look at what's occurred on Friday, and if you've watched any amount of news, you have seen completely different viewpoints, completely different messaging, but it seems to me that a lot of it is delivered in an inflammatory and aggressive way. And it kind of tends to, as you're sitting there, in my case, in my recliner that my wife wishes I never had gotten. I know, that's on you. I can find myself getting a little bit agitated because of, again, the tone, the word choices, and I think that's by design. I think it is intended to be aggressive, intended to be inflammatory, intended to send a message of, I'm right, I'm in charge, what have you, and then the next group comes in and tries to do the same thing, and what does that give us? Conflict. I see a lot of heads going up and down. So again, he ignored the advice of the elders. He rejected the wisdom and the years of experience, chose to believe his friends. And then the last point I'll make on verse 15, that tells us that his actions fulfilled God's prophecy that the kingdom of Israel would in fact be divided because the people had abandoned God and followed other pagan gods, and that God fulfilled that he was going to give Solomon's son one kingdom to rule, and that's exactly what he ended up with, right? Okay. And wow, what a difference one ruler can make. I think that's something else that we've learned. We've seen history and what a difference it made. So coming towards the end of the verses here, 16 through 19, and when all Israel saw what the king, that the king did not listen to them, the people answered the king, what portion do we have in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel, look now at your own house, David. So Israel went to their tents, but Rehoboam reigned over the people of Israel who lived in the city of Judah. Then King Rehoboam sent Boram, who was taskmaster over forced labor, and all of Israel stoned him to death with stones. And Rehoboam hurried to mount his chariot and flee to Jerusalem. So Israel has been in rebellion since the house of David to this day. That was 16 through 19, so that's the tail end of it. So we see here that his harsh response proved as somewhat of a tipping point. He delivered the message, and his constituents, the people that he hoped to intimidate, they essentially came back with the attitude of, we're not having it. We're done. We saw what your father did. You said it's going to be worse. We're going to push back, if you will. And so, again, as I mentioned earlier, we do see the confirmation that he was allowed to rule over the one kingdom. And I thought it was interesting that what did he do? He sent one of his father's advisors, who was the taskmaster at that time, sent him in hopes that might sway people his way, might help him. Why he thought that, I don't know. But what we do know is when they saw him coming, they remembered him, and they remember what he did, how he treated them, and they clearly sent a message back, we're not having it. What'd they do? They stoned him. I could just kind of in my mind, as my little imagination works, just see him kind of looking over there going, oh, you gotta be kidding me. You know, you sent this guy? You know, go get my stones. And they killed him, right? But, and I thought it was also interesting that although he took the counsel of his buddies, the folks he grew up with, he sent, in an effort to try to appease people, he sent one of his father's advisors, if you will. I wonder why he didn't send one of his friends. You know, maybe none of them would go. Maybe he tried. We don't know that. But we do know the end result was they weren't having it and they killed him. Sending a message back to Rehoboam, we're not going to have it. And what did he do? Hops on his chariot and flees. And the word flee, I think, is used intentionally. It didn't say he got his stuff together and left. That denotes a sense of urgency. I got to get out of here. This is not going well. I got to fly. I may have overplayed my hand, if you will. And so he did. All right. So that said, I'm going to skip over a couple things and kind of just get to a few takeaways for today. I think that what we can learn from this, there's many things as always, but that when we have a leader who makes foolish decisions and it robs, and when I use the term leader, by the way, I'm not thinking of just a political leader. That's the reason I ask you to think about times in your life and times as a parent, if you are one, etc. So I'm thinking leader, of course, political, but maybe the leader of your household, the leader of your business, the leader of a group of people, whatever capacity that may be. But when you have a leader who makes foolish decisions and essentially robs that nation or that person or that family, whoever it is, robs them of any hope, that person probably should not be surprised when they're rejected, they're met with strong rebuttal, right? That should just be understood. I think we've also learned that a lot of times arrogant counsel, getting advice from the wrong sources, people who are perhaps self-serving, which we'll talk about just in a second, that has negative effects. And that when someone, when they don't have their constituents, their family members, their workers' best interest at heart, and they make these bad decisions, either unilaterally or through bad advice and counsel, that never is going to end well. Good leaders should listen to their people. And Mark, I thought about you several times when I was kind of putting this together about the servant leadership and how you were told that doesn't work, when in fact, that's exactly what we need. That's exactly what we need in our political arenas, because I would submit to you that the divisions are great and deep in this country. There's, I think, a lot of reasons for that. But one thing I think is also true, regardless of which side of the spectrum you're on, I don't think that our political leaders are there to serve us. I don't think there's any servant leadership there at all, right? And I think it is self-motivated. Another note I made is that a wise leader is going to seek counsel before making important decisions, and that could go off on a lot of different paths. But I think it's true that if you're in a position of leadership, again, if you are, in your family, work, whatever, if you're making big decisions, you need to seek counsel and guidance. But the big question is, you got to make sure you're going to the right sources. You've got to make sure you understand who you're reaching out to. So I encourage you to think about, what denotes or what are the characteristics of someone who's going to give good counsel, good advice. And but I think one thing that's universal is we should always go to God first, right? Because that's the one thing Rehoboam did not do. Talk to the elders, talk to his buddies, didn't go, and the results were disastrous and resulting in him having to flee. So anyhow, as I've mentioned several times, whenever I get the opportunity to address the class, I like to hopefully bring it to a point where it's something you can think about, something that we can apply in our lives today. So as we get ready to leave, I just want to ask each of you to do these two things. Number one is this, and that is to look at the decisions that you're gonna make over the upcoming week, and look for any kind of self-serving attitudes that you may have, and look at your motivations for those decisions. Are they in the best interest of others? Are they in your best interest, right? And then pray about it. You know, go to God and ask him, hey, look, I've got this decision. You know, how do I make this decision? What is the best thing to do? And use that guidance that assuredly will come back to you, right? And the second thing is think how you can demonstrate humility and wisdom in the decisions that you make in the upcoming week or weeks, and the actions that you take. And again, looking back at what's going on at the tail end of this week and kind of what's going on this weekend, this is a great opportunity for us to be Christ-like and to demonstrate to others that you know, we're confident, nobody's panicking, and to really maybe use that as opportunity. Your decisions and your actions might make the difference for somebody. There may be that opportunity for a conversation with them that gives them something to think about that they never thought about in the past, right? And so make sure that your heart is in the right place, that you've gone to God to seek guidance and counsel, and make a conscious effort in all the decisions you make in the upcoming week. Any questions, comments, anything? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so many of you know I used to teach middle school and high school. I at one point I taught family consumer science for 6 months at Homewood High School, and at that time I did a whole month on the topic of abortion. It was a parenting class, and I thought that was a prime way to get into that. And so we did the history of abortion. We went over the baby being born, and you know, the whole life cycle of a pregnancy, and what are the different timings that they do abortions in different states, and what was legal at that time, and how they did it, you know, what was all involved with it, what different sides thought of politically. At the time, Norma McCorvey was trying to overturn the Roe v. Wade. She is Roe, and she was trying to overturn her own case, and then she failed, which they were shocked at. But at the beginning of the study, the first thing I said, so who believes abortion's okay? And half the arms go up. Okay, who believes it's not okay? The other half go up. Okay, I'm gonna tell you, none of you know what you think yet. And I was like, until you study it and you know what it all entails, and you become wise on this subject, you don't know what you believe. You're just going what somebody told you. And I said, so let's find out what you believe. And so we went through all this, and at the end, I said, some people believe things for a religious reason. And I showed them different religions and what different people said about that in different religions. And at the end, there was some that were just begging, because it was a whole month study on the subject. They're like, Miss Whitaker, please, let's not talk about this anymore. It's just that this is a terrible topic. I said, I know, but everybody needs to know what they really believe, because a friend of yours might come, this might be you. You know, you don't know what you believe, you need to know. And so at the end of it, I took them to the side and I said, this is totally private. Just tell me, what do you believe and why do you believe it? And they all told me. There was like 30 people in the class, 28 of them said, it is wrong. It is wrong because of this, and this. And then 2 people said, no, it's right. And because I just believe that people should have a choice.
Yes,
And
no kidding.
so it was like a huge eye-opener to me that so many people changed their minds just by looking at what it was. And you can't just go by what you see on TV. You can't go by what one person says. You go, yeah, that sounds good. You know, that's not really knowing what you believe on a topic. So,
Especially this day and time, what you see on TV, you know, it is every source out there, in my opinion, is motivated and clearly aligned one way or the other.
you gotta know
Yeah, for yourself.
for yourself.
Right, you gotta make that's right, that's what I was gonna say, you gotta do your own research and make your own decision. Go on to the days of here's the information, formulate your own opinion. All right, so before I get in trouble with Lynn, any
No,
other questions?
I just had one thing too. I thought that was interesting. Learning about how the brain, processes these things. Thank you.
Raybo.
It's funny to look at the two different answers. One of them from the men, the older men, it was logic. If you do these things and treat them kindly, it wasn't, if you do it logically, they thought through it. And they said, these people will love you, and that it's servant leadership. The teenagers, I call them teenagers, whatever. I assume
They're probably
his
45,
peers,
but okay.
45. His friends was complete emotion. Tell these guys we're gonna kill them. I mean, you see what I'm saying? We're gonna make this worse and all this kind of stuff. And it just shows you how, and women are emotional anyway, so we tend to react to emotion. So it made me realize, stop and think with the prefrontal cortex rather than your amygdala, just with the other part. But anyway, and try to, you know what I'm saying? So logic, it was obviously, God's all of his advice is gonna be logical, but I just thought that was interesting too. The emotional advice is always probably gonna be wrong. It's probably always gonna be.
And self-serving advice,
Yeah.
because again, as we talked about here, it's reasonable to believe that his buddies, his advisors, his friends, they had ulterior motives of what could benefit them if he really has a strong control of the country, what jobs they may get, what political clout they would have, they're seen with him, et cetera, et cetera. And so, that's their motivation. Anything else?
I was just gonna say there's two things with different older people. One of them is I've lived through this. They have concrete experience. That's what I think. The other component is the maturity. The maturity is sort of like recognizing, yes, I have real life experience, but this is the delivery method of how we then deliver what I have learned. Very, very book knowledge versus that emotional component, what we're doing, understanding people, how people react to things. And so you deliver the information that's very real life. These are the 10 things I learned, but you deliver it in a way because you understand all the different people you're delivering it to and what their capacity is. So there's really two main reasons on the for the experience and also.
Well, no, that's an excellent point, and I didn't really go into this because one of the things when you're putting a lesson together, at least for me, is trying to stay somewhat on task because you can take 1,000 different paths. But Mitch and I were having a conversation earlier, and this is the term narcissist came up, and that is what I think was Rehoboam's issue. Is he was a narcissist, and the second thing I thought about him was, because I've seen it and I'm sure we've all seen it, that person who has never done anything, they've been handed everything, and therefore they've got that sense of entitlement. And I think his buddies probably knew that. They knew he was a narcissist. He hadn't worked for it, he didn't have the discipline, and they told him what he wanted to hear. So I started to kind of go down that path a little bit earlier when I was putting this together, but chose not to. Okay, well, in the interest of time, because I can see Lynn is about to throw a bottle at me, and but I'm going to make it. You said no later than, and so Mitch, would you mind closing us today?
Heavenly Father, we praise your name. Lord, we thank you that your word never fails. Give us wisdom, give us wisdom. Come to you first. Seek your word, seek your counsel. Give us. Surround us with those who just speak wisdom into our lives. Help us understand always company corrupts good character. As you said in the word, he who walks with the wise grows wise, and the companion of fools suffers harm. Lord, just go with us today. Do what your greatest challenge us to do. Examine our hearts and our motives, the decisions we need to make this week. May we all of this to bring you praise and glory and make much of the name of Jesus. We pray this all in your precious Son's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mitch.